All right.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
We are here to record a new podcast under quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
And
Who are you?
I think I'm Strati, Papa
Yep.
Giorgio.
And I am, last I checked, Father Michael Tischel.
Yeah, I checked a few minutes ago, and
Good.
I'm still the
You're still Father Michael.
I'm still Father Michael. I almost said that. Yeah.
And we are an
Imperfect
Podcast.
I forgot it.
Podcast.
Oh, podcast.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Cue music. So currently, Father Michael and I are looking at each other through FaceTime.
Yes. I don't even get to see your wonderful T-shirt today.
I can move the.
Breaking news. Nobody cares. I like it. No, I like that, actually. I think that's nice.
I like it. I wear it because it's a T-shirt, and
Yeah.
it fits
Yeah.
me, and so therefore I wear it. That's pretty much how I function.
That's a good way to function,
Yeah.
especially these days.
So, what are we talking about today, Father Michael?
Yeah, that's a great question, Strati. I have been this question has sort of been burning in my mind for a few weeks now, and I've just been dying to ask it on the podcast, and so I'm going to ask it, and that's what we're going to talk about.
Sounds really provocative.
Who is Strati?
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do we start that? Who am I?
Exactly.
Well,
Who are you, Strati?
I am Strati.
I am Spartacus.
Yeah, I am Straticus.
Well, let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
Where's that?
Well, for me, my personal life, not family history, is I was born in Virginia,
Oh yeah.
in Alexandria, Virginia, in 1990, to Father Panayoti Papageorgiou and my mom Catherine Papageorgiou. My father was a priest at the time when I was born, and I always tell my life story in a very quick sort of way, but I'll try to draw it out just for the purpose of all this. I was born in the 90s, the start of end of 1990 in November, and when I was 3 years old, I moved to Cyprus in 93.
So do you remember your life at all in Virginia?
No, I have fleeting images. I like at the doctor's office, and then one that I think is a dream that I had that I still remember.
Interesting.
A 2-year-old dream. Well, not a 2-year-old dream, but I was 2 years
Yes.
old. Anyway.
Yeah. The dream of a 2-year-old.
The dream of a 2-year-old, where I was in tall grass running after a cat.
Ooh.
Yeah. And then the cat ate a bug.
Huh.
Yeah. I don't know if it was a dream or it really happened. It might have really happened, and I just think it's a dream.
Interesting.
But I've always remembered it as a dream.
Yeah. Huh. What does that mean?
I don't. Yeah, it's very cryptic.
Yes. Wow.
The grass was really tall, or I was just really short.
And the other question is how I'm putting you on the spot here, but for how many years was your father a priest when you were born?
Oh goodness, he had been a priest for a few years.
Okay.
He had been a priest for maybe 3 years. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, because it was somewhere mid 80s, right?
Yeah, it was like early or late 80s, I think.
Yeah.
He became a priest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, mid to late 80s.
Yeah, so for a few years.
Yeah, I think they had me for 3. I think they hadn't had me for 3 years after they got married, and
I see.
Not long after they married, I think.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
So then you were 3 years old when you all moved to Cyprus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like 3.5.
Okay.
Yeah, and then my sister was born there, and we were there in Cyprus for 8 years, and then we moved to Florida, where we spent 5 years, and then we moved to Georgia, where I have on and off been ever since.
So your earliest sort of formation, I mean, I guess the first 3 years is definitely significant, but really your earliest conscious formation happened when you were in Cyprus.
The first things I truly remember, the first experiences of my life that I remember.
Besides the cat and the...
Yeah, besides the cat in the doctor's office.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we're all in Cyprus, so my formative years as to like the foundations of who I am were there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And where did you all move in Cyprus?
We lived in Agianapa, which is a coastal town. It's actually a huge tourist spot. In the 80s and 90s, it was a big European destination, and it still is, but it's actually more of a Russian destination than any other group at the moment.
Interesting.
I think it's between the Russians and the Brits at this point.
Huh.
Although you'd never know it, you'd think it was just Russians.
That's really interesting.
All the restaurant signs are all like in Russian,
half and half. Uh-huh.
Or just in Russian. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, that is. So for our listeners who may not know, so your father is originally from Cyprus, from what's now the occupied part of Cyprus, northern Cyprus. What was the actual town that he was from originally?
The town was called, although the Turks changed the name, Marathovounos.
Okay.
The Turks changed it to something else with a U, but
I see.
We don't recognize that name.
Right.
They repopulated it with Turks that came from Turkey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then your mother is originally from the States.
Yeah, my mom's life story is interesting it's she was born actually in Germany on a military base.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
She was born in Germany on a U.S. military base. Her father was he was a goodness, I think he was a colonel by the end of his service, and she was born there. But she never really had like a place of origin, like a firm place in the United States, because they moved back, but then they kept traveling, moving from place to place to place to place. So there's really no state that, I guess you could say Florida maybe, because I think they ended up in Florida at the end of his service, but yeah, by her adulthood was, I guess, finally in Florida.
Yeah.
That's where she became Orthodox. Yeah, my mom is not born into the faith. She is a convert, and she converted in her early 20s.
Right.
Met my father at the theological school in Boston.
Right. She was in the college at the time, and he was entering into the seminary.
I think she was in the college. She might have been doing theology, but I don't know.
Okay. I thought that's what I remembered her saying, but
she might have been in Hellenic College. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So back to your early years in Cyprus. So you guys moved to Cyprus, to Agia Napa, when you were 3. Your sister was born there. What was tell me a little bit about us a little bit about what life was like for you growing up in Cyprus.
Yeah, so my father's family is a refugee family from, like we said, the occupied region of Cyprus. Mm-hmm. And they were in Agia Napa.
I see. So that's where his family settled after.
That's where his immediate family settled, like his parents and his. Although the rest are scattered about from different parts of the island. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my grandparents were there when we went. So I got to meet his father and his mother and get to know them. So yeah, I met them. I got to know them, and I think that is probably one of the biggest, points of reference about my life in Cyprus was my grandparents.
Interesting.
Because we're talking about very devout people, and although came from very illiterate sort of backgrounds, were very literate. They were very literate. I mean, they didn't finish like high school or even elementary school. I don't know about my grandmother. I know my grandfather did not finish elementary school. I think he got the 3rd grade.
Wow.
But they were incredibly literate for their generation, I guess you could say. They both read all the time, and they weren't village people, if you catch my drift. Like, they weren't uneducated village people that kind of. I mean, he was a farmer. My grandfather was a farmer, but everybody else in her family became a teacher. My grandmother's family became a teacher, except for her, and she wanted to be a teacher though. But she was the eldest, and therefore had to take care of the younger ones, and so could not fulfill sort of her education due to that. And that was very common practice for in Cyprus, where the eldest would probably, sacrifice sort of their needs for the younger
I guess
ones.
what you were saying is she had the desire and the capacity to pursue, kind of an intellectual path, but her life circumstances.
Yeah, my grandfather said it. He's passed away now, but he would say that she was as sharp as a tack. Like, she was very, very intelligent. In fact, she was the handler of all the finances and all the economic matters of the family, whereas he was just out in the field on his tractor. And he was an interesting person because he was really serious when I was young, but like honey, as sweet as honey when he got. Well, when I say young, I mean when I was really young, he was like very serious, always quiet, didn't say much, and his look told you what he meant.
Interesting.
Whether it was good or it was bad. The first time I remember lying was actually to him. And how he dealt with it was just by picking me up, putting me on his motorcycle and driving me home. It was he didn't.
Oh, so you lied at his house?
Well, I would play with my cousins because I had cousins, and they all lived together with my grandparents and my cousins, and they all kind of lived in the same kind of place. They weren't in the same part of the house, but they were in different parts of this complex. But anyway, and I guess I went across the street, which for a 4-year-old is pretty dangerous. And he goes, "What are you doing over there?" And I was like, "I was looking for you," And he just said, "Get over here." I went over there. He didn't say a word to me. He just got on his motorcycle and he took me home.
Wow. Interesting.
And, they were the kind of people that never left church. They were always in church. They were very faithful. My grandfather's father was a priest, which is where we get our last name from. Our last name, Papa Georgiou or Papa Georgiou, means of Father George. And this, and actually...
What was his last name?
His last name, I like that question. His last name was Hagievangelu.
Which has to do with a pilgrimage, right?
Yes, because his father, they were having, I believe the story goes, that they had a hard time conceiving. And they made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land to pray for this. And they kind of said that they'll offer their son, if they have a son, they'll offer him to the church. And so then when he was born, they put him on the path to become a priest, and it
interesting,
and it worked out.
What does that mean that they put him on the path to become a priest?
I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know exactly, but they kind of dedicated him to become a priest, and and kind of pushed that sort of thing. And he was
that would be interesting to know how.
I don't know exactly.
Yeah, how they did that.
I don't know. We're talking about probably the 1800s at this point.
Wow. Yeah.
If not the early 20th century.
Interesting.
My grandfather was born in 29, so, or 28.
But in some senses, I mean, this is just my imagination, but it's like, I wonder,
Sure.
it was like, when they said that prayer, like, is he going to, that will dedicate him
Yeah.
to God, did that almost in a certain sense change his destiny, in the sense that like he had the desire to be, like that he
I don't know.
himself like had the desire, or was it like they just like kept planting the seeds along the way? Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. My dad kind of says that kind of thing isn't the best thing to do,
Right.
but at the same time, it worked for him.
Sure.
He liked it.
Right.
He didn't have a problem with being a priest.
Sure. It's not necessarily something that we would
Yeah, like
imitate, but
yeah, like I
it
heard
happens.
I heard a story where Martin Luther, not King, the original Martin Luther, he was in a terrible storm. He was caught in it, and he prayed to God, if you save me, I'll become a priest.
Sure.
I'm not sure that's the most
Yeah. Well,
appropriate.
and there's a number of different stories of people who were sort of in a dire circumstance. I'm trying to. There was one that I recently heard of. Who was it? Anyway, but yeah, people who were in a dire circumstance and said, if you save me from this, I'll dedicate myself.
And in my
to
great
you.
grandfather's case, I mean, he it was difficult on him though, because his wife, my great grandmother, died early, and so then he never remarried. So he had like 4 kids, more than that, I think, and just had to raise them all.
Wow.
And so then had the older ones start raising the younger ones with him.
Sure.
Of course, it was different times. I mean, we're talking about a village where you're related to like 1/3 or 2/3 of the people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was a big village for Cyprus. It was like 2,000 people, but still, people probably pitched in, helped out, and all kinds of things like that. But it was definitely a burden. I mean, here in the U.S., we're dealing, they were saying they want to make some sort of concession to allow priests to remarry or something.
Right.
Some sort of rumor
Right.
that went around, but probably won't happen.
Yeah.
And I just think to my great grandfather who did it. He did
That's amazing.
He didn't. I mean, I wasn't there. I've never met him, but he was. And he was also an uneducated priest. He didn't give sermons. He didn't give. He didn't do confessions. He was a simple priest. He took my father by the hand and kind of picked my father to be a priest. This is the interesting part of the whole thing.
That is interesting.
Is that he kind of, at first he wanted his, my dad's older brother. But then when my dad came around, I guess I don't know, he just felt like Panagioti would probably be good at this. So there's actually a picture of the two of them holding hands and walking from church.
Really?
Yeah. I'll show
That's
it to you
interesting.
sometime.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
And somebody might be wondering, why is all that family history important? Well, I mean, that's who I am.
Right.
I come from an Orthodox, well, on the one hand, an Orthodox, very strong Orthodox world, and on the other hand, I come from a totally different world. My mom's side is nothing to do with Orthodoxy.
Right. Yeah.
My mom's side probably came on the Mayflower. Or who knows? Maybe they're that old is what I'm getting at. There's Civil War and before that,
Yeah.
So
we've talked about this like in a kind of like a scattered way, like here and there. But what's and maybe this is jumping ahead a little bit, but what is, and we could jump back too. But what is your what's your feeling or your experience of coming from these two worlds, I guess? I mean, of like, how does that, and again, you had your formative years in Cyprus, like what's your,
it's been kind of an up and down kind of thing, hasn't it? Because, from a very personal perspective, the difficulty of moving from Cyprus to almost being cut off from the side that's very Orthodox to some extent. I mean, obviously I had my parents, were very, devout people, but, kind of being cut off from it not entirely. We went back and visited and stuff, but kind of dealing only with the American side of life kind of was frustrating, for me.
Yeah.
It just, here and there during my teenage years and things like that, kind of, and that when you're a teenager, you're wondering who you are and what you are, and that part was definitely a factor of my growing up. It's definitely what led to TrisagionFilms being founded, and it also is the perspective of TrisagionFilms is rooted in both of these sorts of both of these world views, the American and the Cypriot, but mainly the Cypriot in the sense of like where the root of it all comes from that experience of life.
Yeah.
Like for instance, like going to church at 5 a.m. on Christmas.
Right.
Getting in my dad had this like car, this little green car, which didn't have it was just a 2-seater, and in the back was just like a I don't know how you explain it, like a truck, but like not a truck, but it was closed, and you could put boxes or whatever in the back. Well, in Cyprus, there are no laws. So it's 5 a.m, it's dark. I'm like 8 or 9, and we're going to pick up my grandmother so she could take her to Christmas morning service. And I'm hiding in the back from her. And she gets in the car and she turns to me and goes, Where's Strati? And I jump out and kind of startle her. That these sorts of experiences of an Orthodox life and Orthodox grandparents and an Orthodox setting is definitely what, obviously there's so much more to my father's theological depth and
Sure.
The conversations we had even as a 4-year-old with him. I had theological conversations I can go into, which are pretty interesting. But what I'm getting at is that these are all the things that led to TrisagionFilms being made in an American setting.
Yeah.
If I hadn't come to the United States, TrisagionFilms wouldn't have the same experience behind it.
So is what you're saying that you came back to the States and you experienced kind of this distance from your Orthodox upbringing and environment, and TrisagionFilms in a certain sense is an attempt to kind of draw that out of yourself, or kind of for the sake of people. I mean, what?
Well, it's what I'm trying to. I guess I'm kind of mixing things up here, but what I'm really trying to say is that the fact that I lived in Cyprus, came here, experienced both.
Yep.
Even went to a Protestant middle school for a little bit, for middle school, all culminated in my desire to bring Orthodoxy to the American landscape, to the American world. So had I just been born here, maybe I still would have wanted to, but my attempt with TrisagionFilms is to bring the Orthodox world to America through the videos.
Right. Yeah.
Had I not lived in Cyprus, I would not have been able to convey this sort of 2,000 years of practical experience that the Cypriots have.
And I guess that's actually, that is, your articulation is what I was actually trying to ask, and in the sense that, I mean, that the little story that you told about going to Christmas with your dad and then picking your grandmother up. I mean, it's a very interesting story, because on pretty much all levels, except, well, let me just say it, on pretty much all levels, the same story could have happened in the States, right? So nothing, in a certain sense, nothing of what you said is unique to Cyprus as far as the external, with the exception of perhaps the timing of the Christmas liturgy, which was at 5 instead of...
And I didn't come from convert. It wasn't a convert or a non-Orthodox grandmother.
Sure. But yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, so I said you experienced life in Cyprus, and experiencing it is so much more significant than reading about it, right? So even something as seemingly trivial as an early morning drive, right, is part of the experience of the church and the tradition of the church, the capital T tradition, I would even say, right?
And then processions around the village. And,
sure.
You know, I led the processions. I like little 8-year-old me. There's pictures of me in a altar boy robe holding the candle, the lantern, and a big lantern, much bigger than me, and and be the first person in the line of 500, 600 people, walking around the village. You know, stuff like that. The Father Athanasius, Bishop Athanasius, said it the other day in Cyprus, discussing the coronavirus and people's worries about stuff. And he was saying that we in Cyprus, we've had this for 2,000 years. It's not, it's built into our landscape. We are not, we're not. He was referring to America and certain things that were happening here, and he was going, let us remember that in America there are many converts and it's new there. And let us not judge them if their bishops do this or that about this virus. We have a different experience. And yeah, it's what you said, is capital T tradition in one of the heartlands of Orthodoxy.
Sure.
That I want to bring through TrisagionFilms to people.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And but I think that's so essential because it's something your father has mentioned a couple times. I think I'm still kind of mulling on, but it is. I think it's a very connected point, which is that sense of the continuity of the tradition in a very practical way, based on the whole practice of baking prosperon, of baking the holy bread for communion, and how it's not baked with just regular old yeast, but there's something called prosimi, which is like the leaven that one generation of Prospera bakers will pass on to the next generation. And if you were to kind of take that and imaginatively kind of think about how, well, if that's been happening since basically the very beginning, when the Eucharist was first performed or celebrated in Cyprus in the apostolic period, then the capital T tradition has been passed down through the prosimi, through the leaven, right, of the holy bread, all the way up until today. I mean, that like holy tradition, right? It's like and so it's like, go ahead.
And not just that, but that's a beautiful one too. That chain, and not just like the chain of bishops, right?
Right, apostolic succession.
Not just apostolic succession on the clerical level.
Which is great. It's wonderful. It's very significant. Yeah. No, not at all.
But even on the laity's level,
sure,
there is, and women too, because I hear grumblings sometimes, sure, from people who don't quite understand certain things, that women don't have enough of a role or something like that. But in Orthodox countries, they have almost the biggest roles.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's always the women that are the most devout.
Right.
The men are always like,
Yeah. So I mean the idea or the phrase that comes to mind is, it's like, this is the holy tradition between the lines. Like when we talk about like read between the lines, right? So it's like you've got the holy tradition of like the explicit, apostolic succession, the articulated, written holy tradition, right? But then there's this the holy tradition that I would say is even more significant than the articulated holy tradition, right? Because it's like experience is at the foundation and the heart of everything. Right. Yeah. And it's what makes the articulated tradition able to be articulated. I mean, what are we articulating if we don't have that very kind of grassroots, very fundamental experience of, so yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the inspiration behind TrisagionFilms. Obviously, let's say I had never lived in Cyprus, I'd probably still be very theologically inclined. I'm sure I'd be very, Orthodox in that sense, but there's that
That's something.
There's that salt, if you made that pinch of salt in
Or that prosimi, that
prosimi,
leaven.
you were correct. Right? The what do you call that in English?
Leaven.
That leaven in the bread of my life. That is those 8 years in Cyprus that you just cannot.
That's very significant. Even though the leaven is only a tiny part of the bread, right? It's what makes everything happen. It's the
way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that's a you moved to exile in Florida, and how'd you guys manage there?
It was difficult for my dad. It was probably from a early teens was probably some of the best times of my life. Made my first real close friends there, and then we left there, and we came to Georgia. That was a big part of the story.
Mm-hmm. What was your mom's, and maybe we should just do an interview with her at some point, but what was your mom's experience of being Orthodox, of becoming Orthodox, not having that same sort of generational foundation, I guess?
My mom, I actually talked to her about it recently. It's an interesting story. So my mom's parents, her father was not religious.
Mm-hmm.
It actually reminded me a lot of the documentary we watched about the nuns.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. NONES.
NONES,
yeah.
Correct. I was about to say that too. Her father was not very religious at all, and her mom was. Now, her mom, though, was from the South, from, I believe, North Carolina. And so she, Bible Belt, Southern, I don't remember. I don't think she was Southern Baptist, but they were religious people.
Yep.
And so she would take them to Sunday school and church, but due to the constant moving around, that was kind of an on and off thing.
Sure.
But my mom had this interesting story where she started to, we're talking about like a kid now, like a little kid started to question whether God even existed. And then they lost their neighbor's dog or something, and then they prayed, and then the dog was standing right behind them, or not too far away from them in the opposite direction. and they were like, well, no, God's definitely real. She and her little friend at the time.
Huh.
Yeah. And and then when she, beyond that, they weren't really rooted in any tradition or any church. She just knew that she wanted to find the true faith, the original church, something original, something with roots that are deep. And she was just drawn to the Orthodox Church. She walked into an Orthodox church, a Greek one, walked right through the narthex, straight in to the nave, and sat in the front pew. And they knew she wasn't Orthodox. She didn't venerate an icon. She didn't light a candle.
Yeah. And at that time, that was how many years ago? That was
the 80s, early 80s, maybe.
Right. So that would have been even more significant than it is today, because at that time, what's that?
A lot less converts.
Less converts, and then and just not quite as a lot of the kind of more ethnically based churches were not necessarily open to people coming in and just visiting, especially
in Florida, and that kind of snowbird setting where you have all these Greek Americans that come down from the north and live in Florida and go back, and whatever in the summer.
And the entire service probably was in Greek, I'm guessing, right?
Probably. I wasn't.
So she just kind of walked in there, went straight up to the front. And sat in the front pew.
I feel like I've seen converts do that now, or people who aren't converts, like people who are just they walk in and they just go straight to the front.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, she was really open to it, and she didn't have, she didn't come from a strong, background, which probably made it easier for her to accept so many of the things in Orthodoxy, like icons and chanting, and I don't think she had any trouble accepting any of that. It was she didn't come from a Bible thumping, if you may, family or anything. So, yeah, and like I said, she met my dad at the seminary because that's how serious she was about, her faith. And beyond that, she learned how to chant, and she would, I think she would do, she and my dad would chant together. They started a parish together. My dad was the first priest of a parish in Virginia after he became priest, and she was the chanter, choir director. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's a lot of interesting data about who Strati is based on his past. There's a good quote that came to mind as you were talking by Father Dimitri Staniloae. He's a Romanian dogmatic theologian and professor of dogmatics who was also affected pretty significantly by the communist regime there, and is considered today by many Romanians to be a holy man who was very intellectually gifted, but would be approached by both the intelligentsia of his day and also the very simple everyday faithful. And I've been mulling over this quote a little bit, which was taken from which was referenced in an article that a friend of mine wrote about the theological perspectives of Father Dimitri Staniloae and also now Saint Sophrony of Essex on particularly this idea of man as individual and communitarian being. And this very short, one sentence quote that's very packed, but it relates very much to what you have to say. So can I read it all right, so he says, every man's hypostasis comes from God. So hypostasis in this sense, he's referring to existence on a unique and individual level, not just the fact that you are a human in a general terms, but your unique hypostasis. Every man's hypostasis comes from God, has God as its source. But it comes, and this is where I think it's significant, but it comes after having passed through a past accumulated in his earthly parents. Okay? So the hypostasis, your who you are, comes directly from God. Okay? In all of your uniqueness and in all of your generality, but in all of your uniqueness comes directly from God, but it comes from God through the accumulation of your past in your earthly parents and grandparents and whatever. And then he continues and says, and this trail also becomes integrated within the act of him being made in the image he has in heaven. This trail of you coming from God through your parents also then becomes integrated within the act of him being made in the image he has in heaven. So there's a lot there, and a lot that I don't even really understand. But I think that the thing that kind of struck me was this idea that each of us as individuals come from God, but we come through this accumulation, this past that's been accumulated through our lineage, I guess you could say. So our uniqueness has to do with our past. So that's who Strati is and his past. We are at 41 minutes, and my question is do we want to stop now and continue our next episode to talk about who Strati is now, and then have a third part to talk about who will Strati become in the future?
Well, everybody, thank you for listening. I think we're going to wrap it up, and Father Michael and I will continue this little series about me, and I hope you all enjoyed. Take care.
Bye-bye.